Hey guys, D30 here, and today I'm going to be doing a quick review on the topping A30 and D30 amp DAC stack. So these two devices are quite often recommended to people looking for a budget amp and DAC, and they're usually recommended side by side to the Sheet Magni and Modi, or the JDS Atom and Old DAC, and that's for a good reason. So they cost about $100 each on Amazon, so $200 for the total package. However, they do pop up on Massdrop every once in a while for about $184 American dollars, which is where I actually got mine a while back. It should be noted that at this range you won't find any improvement unless you spend a significant amount more, which makes this price range a sweet spot and all the more appealing for the average consumer. I found that there wasn't as much information on the topping stack compared to the likes of the Sheet and JDS combos, so I thought this video would be helpful to those interested in this pair, looking for an opinion, or people who just don't want to sift through all the spec sheets provided by topping. So that being said, let's jump right into the build. First off, both are made of aluminum with a brushed finish throughout on the main body and faceplate. The chassis are held together by flush rivets on the front and back, and they're complemented by some laser engraved text. The connectors on the back are gold plated. They stay firm in place, which is great, and they hold cables quite snug. And of course you can't forget the metal switches on the front, which are definitely satisfying to flip. And overall, taking a look, I think that they feel solid and premium to hold, and it definitely feels like you're getting your money's worth in this department. On the front of the A30 you'll find a voltage switch, a gain switch, a 6.35mm or 1/4 inch output, a 3.5mm output, and lastly the volume knob. The knob is pretty smooth and is firmly situated in its housing, and it also has a bright blue light that shines when turned on. And it isn't overly distracting or anything under decent lighting, but it's definitely noticeable in dim conditions. Overall, I had no real complaints with the knob. However, there is some pot imbalance in the lower volumes, and I'm talking about when you're about 7 o'clock or lower. But for me at least, I was never near that level of volume. It's also something forgivable at this price point, especially considering that it's been observed in similar products. So I think it's not that big of a deal. I also have to say that placing the power switch on the front of the A30 makes turning the device on and off much more convenient. This is compared to something like the Magni. On the back, there's 2 RCA in for the DAC and 2 RCA out if you want to turn this into a preamp or something. You also have an output selecting switch, and lastly a power in that resembles an XLR connector but isn't really. And it has what topping calls linear technology that supposedly separates the power going into the LEDs and whatnot from the power actually going towards the amplification of sound. I can't vouch for this or anything, but the sound is good, and I'll talk more about that later. Side note, the brick for this thing is huge, but fortunately they were thoughtful enough to put it further down the cable so that it wouldn't take up a massive area near your outlet. Moving on to the D30, in front we have an on and off switch, an input selector switch, an LED power indicator that shines blue, and lastly an LED status indicator that shines red if the DAC is disconnected. On the rear there's a 2 RCA out which connects to the amp, your 3 input options for plugging your DAC into your device, which are USB, digital, coaxial, or optical, and lastly you have your DC power in, which luckily has a much smaller adapter. Provided with the stack are the required power cables for the A30 and D30. Also given is a USB to USB-A cable that allows you to connect the DAC to a computer. It worked fine, but I found it a bit flimsy, so I actually upgraded my USB cable to a monoprice one, which I found was much better in terms of build quality. As for interconnects, you must buy your own. Any 2 RCA to 2 RCA will work, but I personally used 2 short braided RCA from Ghent Audio. They're very well made and they look pretty good, so if you plan on purchasing an audio stack of some sort, whether it be from Topping, Sheet, or JDS, I highly recommend these because they are the perfect length, and Ghent, who runs the company, is a great guy in general. If you're interested in these cables, there will be a link below. Alright, now that you've gotten a look at these two devices, let's move on to the sound. So without getting too technical, especially since Topping is pretty transparent with their specs and components all available on their site, here's a brief overview. So the A30 outputs at a maximum of 1551 milliwatts on the 1/4 and 757 milliwatts on the 3.5mm, which is plenty for most headphones, but you may not be comfortable using all headphones on these, as A30 has a weird choice of impedance. and this refers to its unusually high impedance compared to its counterparts. The 1/4 jack outputs at a high 10.8 ohms, while the 3.5mm outputs at a very high 27.8 ohms. And to put that into perspective, the Magni 3 outputs at 0.6 ohms on its single connector. This high level of impedance introduces the possibility of distortion in lower impedance headphones, which is not necessarily a bad thing since the distortion can be for the better, but nonetheless this amp is probably not the best option if you plan on using smaller headphones. For example, some people have seen slight changes in frequency response from headphones in the 80 ohm range and lower. As for the D30, it features a highly regarded Cirrus Logic CS4398 DAC chip, which isn't the newest on the market, but it is definitely a strong contender. The DAC supports DSD64, DSD128, and PCM formats up to 24-bit at 192 kHz. Okay, now that all that information is out there, how does this setup sound and perform in the real world? For that question, I say the stack sounds great, but it's definitely not perfect as you may expect. I'm currently using these with the 250 ohm DT990 Pros, and so far the experience has been good. For these headphones, I've never had to turn the A30 past 2 o'clock on 0 dB, so there's definitely plenty of extra power here, which is great. For the sound quality, the D30 definitely provides clean and neutral audio. When I tested it with some other amps, such as my Onkyo TX8020, I didn't notice any coloring, and that's very good for a DAC. I found the same with the A30, it didn't have any noticeable sound signature, and it provided very clean output. And I guess that's thanks to the linear power technology. I also never experienced any hissing or static even when trying out some of the more sensitive headphones. The mids, treble, and bass all sounded clean, and the instrumental separation is excellent. That being said, the soundstage isn't the greatest in my opinion. I'd say it's a bit more on the narrow side, and I'm feeling that way with my open back DT990 Pros. Something interesting you can do though, to get a step higher in audio quality, is to upgrade the stock op amps to Burson V5i duals. However, they do come at a hefty price of about 70 USD. In the end, I think I only had one main issue with the stack, and this specifically had to do with the DAC when I actually first plugged it in. So Windows 10 installed the default driver and everything worked fine. However, I wanted to use the XMOS driver provided by Topping to, get the maximum experience. This is where I ran into some issues. Whenever I would try installing the XMOS driver, it would essentially fail and revert the DAC to an unknown device status. I was stuck on this for a while and eventually figured out that I had to disable my computer's inbuilt driver verifier within the BIOS in order to get the XMOS working. This was because the specific verifier system process prevents the installation of drivers with unknown signatures, which the XMOS driver given by Topping had. I don't believe this was a huge issue, but I think Topping should have at least addressed it on their webpage. Well, now comes the big question. Is the Topping A30 and D30 worth it to purchase in 2019? My answer to that is yes and no. I think you have to fall into a certain category or profile for this to be the right set of devices for you. In themselves, the two function perfectly as a headphone amplifier and DAC. Like if you were to buy these right now without thinking about anything, you'd be satisfied, since you have tons of flexibility in terms of connection, plenty of power, the option to make a small upgrade, and in general, a very nicely built product. But at the same time, I think that when you compare some aspects of these two to other options on the market right now, you'll find yourself limited. For example, things like the range of headphones you can use due to the limiting impedance, and in general, the older hardware since the stack has been out for a while. If anything, I'd recommend the D30 as a good purchase simply due to its transparency and audio quality, and its capability in connection and features. However, I'd say for the amp, you might want to look at something newer like the JDS Atom, which has definitely raised the bar in amplification quality. If you guys liked this video, be sure to hit that like button, comment if you have any questions. I'm Devik Kirti, and I'll see you guys in the next one.